Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. Tonight is Saturday night, April 24th, 2021, and we've had some very good events in our house this week. Everybody's now fully vaccinated. It's been more than 2 weeks since the last vaccination, and we'll get a chance to celebrate that Monday evening when everybody's off work together. And we're going to thoroughly enjoy the time together, being able to go out to eat and some other things. We also have some good news. For a year, Grace Fellowship Baptist Church has not been able to hold Bible studies at the Estates Rehabilitation Nursing Center. And this week we got word that we are able to come back and lead worship with the residents there. So we are going back tomorrow morning and get to worship with them and look forward to that opportunity to lead them in worship also. So good news this week. Things to pray for, things to be encouraged by. God is still working. God is still in charge. Tonight we're starting the book of Joshua, and we're going to do an overview of the book of Joshua and then start into chapter 1. And the theme of Joshua is God is in charge and control. And Joshua is the central figure, but he is not the only figure, and there are many figures, and we'll get to them in time. We did an overview of who he was last week before the start of the book. The book of Joshua is the first book after the Pentateuch, and historically it follows immediately after Deuteronomy, the book before it. In fact, there's actually a little bit of overlap between the last chapter of Deuteronomy and the first chapter of Joshua. They were probably written by the same group of people, not necessarily authored. Deuteronomy, except for certain parts right at the end after Moses died, was probably authored by Moses. The scribes that recorded it, though, did continue to work, and like they worked for Moses, they worked for Joshua, and they recorded his works. The Jews considered Joshua the first book of the former prophets, and the former prophets they would consider Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And then the latter prophets would be the ones we as Christians know as prophets. The reason they consider these prophetic books is God spoke to and through these people and through these events. And while you have to have some history to understand what happened in these books, and therefore some history is recorded, they did not view it as a historical reference book. And if you compare it with modern history books, it's not really very good history. It is historical, and Christians tend to call these books the books of history in the Old Testament. But the Jews considered them to be prophetic, that they were written by prophets who were spoken to by God and told to record these. And some of them record things that prophets did in that day and time, and some record the events that go on around those people. They would have regarded Joshua himself as a prophet because God clearly spoke to him. We're going to see several times where God speaks to him in the book, and he tells the people God's word. And they also regard the history that's recorded here not as history in a historical sense, even by their standards, the standards of the day, but a history recording how God interacts with people. And therefore, it's historical in the sense of being theological. And so consequently, the theology is more important to them than the historical accuracy. it is historically accurate. God is not inaccurate in his history. And what we've been able to document and verify about archaeology, uh, there's no problems. There are a lot of people that have, through the centuries, thought that these were not historical, did not accurately reflect what happened. But no inaccuracies have ever been found by archaeology or any other evidence-based science. All the speculation that would hint that they are not is just speculation, just reasoning, and it generally comes from groups of scholars that don't want Scripture to be true, don't want miracles to happen. They discount miraculous, they discount things like that that are powerful evidence for God's work in this world. I do think it is an accurate record of God's work in this world. And we are going to talk as we go through here. There are statements that seem to be absolutist, and then later you'll find a modifying statement that indicates that that absolute statement was not absolutely true. I think that is part of the theological, and we're going to talk about that as we come to those statements. That some of those statements are locally true, and yet in full they are modified by other statements made also in the book of Joshua. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the great sea on the west. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you. The Lord your God is giving you rest and has granted you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men, fully armed, must cross over ahead of your brothers. You are to help your brothers until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. After that you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your word, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. And so, this is the introduction. And notice there is a repeated phrase here in this passage that's said um, repeatedly, and you're going to see it throughout the book of Joshua. The Lord told Joshua, "Be strong and courageous." Joshua tells the people, "Be strong and courageous." The people tell Joshua, "Be strong and courageous." And it's done over and over again. And almost every time God talks to Joshua, he tells him, "Be strong and courageous." As I pointed out last week, this is the first words we have Joshua recorded as saying, actually. When he was to lead the people to fight the Amalekites, he told them, "Be strong and courageous." That is the watch phrase for the book of Joshua. Be strong and courageous. They needed to know that God was the Almighty, the Lord of hosts, the one who won battles, who won wars. And if they obeyed him, if they did what he said, if they did it in the way he said, then they would have success. And if they did not, then it wasn't their courage, their wisdom, their knowledge, their military tactics that won the battle. It was God's. And if they weren't obeying God, then God would not give them success. But if God was with them, all they had to do was be strong and courageous, resolute, and do what God told them to do, no matter how hard it seemed. And they would win. It is the theme, so to speak, of Joshua. Be strong and courageous. Do not back down from that. If God is your God, if Yahweh is your God, if Jesus is your Lord, be strong and courageous. Nothing this world can do to you will destroy that. You have eternal security, and even if the worst happens to you in this life, you're dead and with God. Joshua didn't have that promise. They were entering a physical land of rest, not a eternal land of rest. We have a new heaven and earth, new earth waiting for us. He had a physical earth here, physical land here on earth. Thing is, as a young man, he had spied it out, and the promise God gave him is, everywhere you set your foot, you will own. Quite a promise. And he and Caleb are the only men that have survived from that period in time. Everybody else that was a man, that was an adult, when they went to spy the land, his dad. It's all the children that those men were worried about being taken to captivity. They're now the adults, and they're entering the land. And Moses has died. They took the survey. Moses was the only one alive that had seen that thing other than Joshua and Caleb. And then God told him to go up the mountain. He died. God buried him. They've grieved. And now it is time to obey God. And Joshua has been the appointed heir, the leader to be leader of the Israelites. They are to go and enter the land. And God appoints Joshua. The second time he commissions, and God speaks to him and tells him, quite a long little speech here, gives him a goal of where all they're going to conquer and own as their land. In fact, the Euphrates is in what's now Iraq, and all the Hittite country would be all of what's now Syria and Lebanon and Turkey and Israel and the country of Jordan and everything from the river of Egypt, which is essentially uh, the south side, the west side of Sinai Peninsula. So all of Sinai, all of Israel. It's a huge chunk of land. And at the north of it, you have the Hittite Empire. At the south of it, you have the Egyptian Empire. In the middle, you have a no man's land for both of those countries. They had, about a century before, fought to a stalemate, and both sides realized neither one could win, and that the only way they would either one prosper is if they quit fighting this war and reached a political agreement. And so they essentially marked a line that's the line of influence. They wouldn't, neither one would cross that line to try to influence the other. They would basically live as not allies, but not combatants, not enemies after that. Egypt wouldn't go north of the line. Hittite Empire wouldn't come south of the line. They could do trade with each other, but they would respect each other's territory and rights, and they could have influence up to the line. They could conquer any country on their side of the line, any peoples on their side of the line, but they wouldn't cross it. And for nearly 2 centuries, neither after that, uh, well, for the life of the Pharaoh that was alive that made that treaty, he kept troops at the line to make sure the Hittites didn't do anything, and the Hittites kept soldiers at the line. But his successor said that's too much money to keep troops way up there, and he brought them home. And basically, the Hittites were also in that same kind of financial bind. They didn't need to spend money way off on the frontier, past their um, actual real control, because the fight had been so severe on both sides that they actually lost territory. In all of Palestine, all of Lebanon, all of what's now Syria, had been lost and gone over to the local peoples, and they made their own empires. And so the Canaanites had set up their own little kingdoms. Now, the thing is, the Canaanites, they had been used to being under the rule of Egypt, basically since the time of Abraham. And when the Hittites fought the Egyptians to a standstill, and the Egyptians fought the Hittites to a standstill, they essentially become practically free and independent peoples. They had always been fractured. As we read through Joshua, there's innumerable little bitty states. There's essentially little city-states, and every walled city was its own country. And if they could control enough land around it, they could get some power. But the people out in the countryside very often didn't pay taxes or anything. They might do trade with the city. If an enemy came in and attacked them, they might, run to the city and ask for protection. But they very often didn't contribute to the city unless it was in their benefit. Now, that said, they very often did economically and culturally trade with cities. But if you were halfway between two, you might actually trade with both and try to tell both that you were loyal to them, even though the two cities might be at war with each other. But when it came time to actually support one city against the other, no, you disappear and pull out and let the troops go to it and then take back over your land afterwards. The Canaanites had become very corrupt. Their religion had deteriorated to a very hedonistic religion. Baal worship Baal had originally been in their language the name of God, and actually Baal, the word itself meant God, and they recognized that, at least at the beginning, that there was one God, and they were worshiping that one God. The problem is God did not speak to them, and they had compromised with the Egyptians. They'd compromised with the Hittites. They had worshipped their gods too. They'd worshipped the gods of the Phoenicians. They'd worshipped the gods of the traders that came through. And then, as they did that, they compromised their religion more and more. And it became that Baal worship was just the worship of sensuality, and depends upon what part of the year and what the occasion was. Um, the religious practice could be orgies or feast or drunkenness or. And temple prostitution was very common. Not even just female prostitution, but male prostitution also. Uh, it, it became a cesspool that the Egyptians got to where they didn't want to even send their soldiers up there for fear their soldiers would be corrupted. That tells you how very bad it was. And so, into this mix, God sends his people. Now, God had told Abraham that 400 plus years later, the people would leave Egypt and come in at the time of the wickedness of the Canaanites was full. And now was that time. Their wickedness was full. God was finished with them. He wanted them wiped off the face of the earth. He wanted their religion to be wiped out. He did not want any vestige of this hideous mockery of worshiping him by doing everything he said not to do. Many of the rules that he gave Moses were in direct opposition to Canaanite practices, even though probably the Israelites didn't know much about the Canaanite practices at the time. They probably hadn't had much practice interacting with him. So, in preparation of that, Joshua is told, be strong and courageous. You're going to go in and possess the land I'm giving you. And it's come to that fullness of time when the Canaanites no longer are allowed by God Almighty to have any land. And they are to be wiped off the face of the earth because of their wickedness. And so, Joshua prepares the people to go in. We're going to pick up with Joshua chapter 2. Joshua chapter 2. Then Joshua son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Let me explain a little bit about Rahab and the culture of what she was doing. There was no formal inns. The culture of the land, if you were traveling, you stayed and hosted with somebody. However, there was places, establishments that made their living basically by being hostels, being hotel homes. They were known for hosting people. And in the Canaanite culture, with the worship of sexuality being part of the worship of the land, these hostels became places where, as you traveled, you could hire sexual favors from the establishment and from the people who ran them. And so she wasn't running a house of prostitution per se. But on the other hand, she basically rented her rooms out. She sold food and drink to the people who were traveling. And if they paid a little bit more, she wouldn't mind earning a little bit of cash by having some fun with them. The Israelite view of this was anybody who was not faithful to their spouse was a prostitute. The word that they used was just somebody who was sexually immoral. The stigma of she might, if you paid enough cash, do something for you was enough to label her as prostitute. It wasn't that she earned her money that way. She actually did the kind of work that the people there would have to do. I mean, that's why she had stacks of flax on her roof. You don't have raw flax that you're going to turn into linen later on your roof curing unless you're planning to do the work of turning flax stalks into linen. It's not something you store for trade later. If she had bundles of flax on her roof, and basically, in that day and time, how they got linen from flax, when it was the appropriate amount of dried, after they then cut it down and bundled it up and stuck it where it wasn't rained on, it didn't stay wet, but it also didn't just totally dry out. And the bacterial action and the fungal action on it, the softer parts of the flax stalk decayed away and became soft, and then when it dried out, it became powdery and left the linen unaffected in the middle. And then after a certain length of storage under the right conditions, bundled correctly, you basically spread it out in the sun, let it dry, and you beat it with a stick, and all the stuff that wasn't the fibers that was linen turned to a powder, to a dust, and fell out between. And then you could pick up the threads of flax, shake out the dust, comb it out, and you had linen. And a fairly easy process, time-consuming, but that's what she was doing. She had these big bundles of flax up on the roof, packaged to treat it just right, that in a few weeks or months' time, the part that wasn't the linen fibers would decay away, and then she could spread it out and dry it and get the linen. And then she was probably doing that because she would then make a thread, linen thread, and weave cloth, and have clothing. Linen was one of the things that grows well in that area, flax. And in that day and time, they kept the seed for planting, but the linen was the valuable part. Today, we eat the flax seed and throw away the plant. Some linen is used, made, but farmers that harvest linen harvest the stalks at a different time and generally don't let them seed. Those who harvest the seed um, grow them for the seed and harvest the seed and throw away the stalk. Uh, it, from what I've read on it, the current practice is you don't do both. Um, in that day and time, they were probably a little more frugal than that, and may have eaten the seed in addition because you couldn't throw away anything that was useful. It was rather tough land to make a living at, and they probably ate the seed because you didn't want to waste anything that was valuable food. Um, but the main thing they did was using the linen because they needed the fiber more. And it made a very nice cloth. This is before cotton made it to the Middle East, and so you either wore linen or wool. Um, it would be shortly after this the cotton seed finally made it to Palestine, and the Israelites would start growing cotton. Um, Cotton fiber itself was known, and there were some people in Egypt beginning to grow it, but most of the cotton was imported, and it was a luxury. Uh, but the locals thought the cotton was inferior to linen because they could grow linen and do a lot more things with linen than they could cotton because the linen fibers were longer. Um, some linen plants will produce a single fiber 6 feet or more long, and you make a thread that is like that. You can make very thin, very strong threads, very long, because if a single fiber is 6 feet long, you only have to have, a little bit of overlap in the end, and you can have thread that for most of its length is a single fiber. Cotton, you're going to have multiple strands, and you can have some pretty fine cotton fiber, cotton thread, but it never is a single thread of cotton fiber in diameter. It's always multiples so that they can twist together and hold together and be a thread. Linen, you can make a thread that is mainly a single fiber, single linen fiber. And so very soft, very durable goods can be made out of linen. That's why even today it is considered a premium fiber. So she does labor that is, shall I say, does economic good. She doesn't earn her living by selling her body. She's willing to sell her body a little bit to make some profit, if it suits her. She makes her main money probably, though, by renting rooms and selling food and drink. So the two spies, after they spied out the land, they went to the local hostel to sleep overnight. Well, while they're there, the word gets out where they are. And the king, who, he's called a king, but he's essentially a mayor. He does have a standing army. Jericho at the time was probably about 10,000 people. So a standing army, he probably has a few hundred soldiers. And they double as military and police and probably the taxing authority and the border patrol and most of the functions of government. They probably even doubled as the bureaucrats that kept the government running. I mean, this is a small city-state, and Jericho was one of the larger cities. So you got to understand, this is not, a million people with, 200,000 standing army or anything like that. They have a little town, really. But it's a walled city. They've gone to the bother of putting up stone walls around it to protect themselves. And consequently, it does take some investment to keep it protected, keep it guarded, keep it secure, and so there's some ongoing expense, and you got to pay back the effort and time that was meant to went into making it, and so those who owned the wall became the king of the city, and they had to have a standing army, they had to collect taxes, etc., to keep that going. But in the process, they protected everybody else, and so the king of Jericho is a little concerned. There's this huge group of people, and everywhere they've turned, they've defeated everybody they've faced. For 40 years, they've been hearing about all the magnificent military things these people have done. Beat the Amalekites, the uh, they're enemies on the inside of the Jordan. The Sihon king of and all those people, and some mightier people than them, and wiped all the people off the face of the earth. And the rumor is they're coming for you. Well, the king of Jericho is very concerned about that. He doesn't want to lose his position. He has a profitable position, a favorable position. He has power and influence, and people pay him to do that. And he's wealthy, and he owns a city, at least the city walls and city government, and he has a standing army, and he's got to protect that. And he doesn't want the enemy knowing about his fortifications and his strengths and weaknesses and where the cracks in the wall are and everything else that he worries about that somebody might know and therefore use to their advantage against him. So when he finds out they're staying at the hostel of Rahab, he sends some people over and goes, hey, the spies are with you, turn them over to me, and we'll take care of this and keep you safe. Well, Rahab had hidden, and we're going to pick up in verse 8, because we're going to find out why she did. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God of heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. So they've heard, and they know that God is fixing to destroy them, defeat them, and she's pleading for her life and the life of her family. And that's why she hid them. She wanted a favor from them. She wanted to live. She didn't want to be one of the people killed. And they knew it, and the people had lost courage and were afraid, and they were unwilling to fight, unwilling to try to defend themselves. God had so thoroughly scared them. God was preparing the way. The people were unwilling to defend their land, unwilling to fight, just certain that God was going to defeat them. And so, she's pleading for her life. Verse 14, our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we're doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. Now she had said to them, "Go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourself there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." The men said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If anyone goes outside their house into the street, his blood will be on his own head. We will not be responsible. As for anyone who is in the house with you, his blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on him. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed. She tied the scarlet cord in the window. So the deal they made is, okay, you protected us, we'll protect you. Anybody that's in this house, and it's part of the city wall, and she let them down through the window that faced out of the city wall to the outside, so they can escape. They escape. The details of that are not really that important right now, but they're reasonable. The men are going to go to the Jordan and search for you and come back, and it's going to take them so long, and they're going to look. And so spend longer than that out in the woods when they're not looking for you, and hide out. And then when they get back into the city and you see that, then you can go back by a more circuitous route and go on to your way. And Rahab then has her family stay in her house until the defeat of Jericho. And, after the defeat of Jericho, they're brought out. But they make the deal that, only if they're in this house that has this scarlet thread in the window, scarlet cord in the window, if, nobody will harm anybody inside the house, and everybody outside the house will be killed. And if you leave, be that on your own head, you're going to die. And, that's what happens. So her family stays in her house. Everybody else doesn't know about it. And we'll find out later what happens to all of them. But verse 22. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." What a different report these spies told than the first set of spies. Now, Joshua did this on his own. He wasn't commanded by God to do it. But these men believed God just as Joshua and Caleb had. And they gave the report, and they knew that the land was totally terrified of them. And so they gave that report to Joshua. And they know it's time to cross and win. They're trusting God. These are the children that have seen God work in their parents' lives for 40 years and see them die in the desert. And they've come to obey Moses and come to obey Joshua, his aide. And it's now time for Joshua to lead, and he's leading, and they say, yes, it is time. God has prepared the way. They can see that it's going to happen, and it's indeed going to happen. And so we see the details. The history of this was told to show that God was preparing the way. The people were disheartened in the land. They were scared. They were expecting to be defeated and killed, and doing nothing about it. They didn't flee. They didn't prepare fortifications. They just quaked. So God was working on their spirit to make their defeat easy. Rahab was used to negotiating with people and getting her way through negotiation. She knows that if she doesn't do something desperate, even if she turns these men in, God's going to still defeat her. So she makes a deal with them to save her life and the life of her family. We actually don't know who all was in her family. It's just known after this as the Rahabite clan. It's named after her. She's the one that pulled the deal. And so therefore, anybody who stayed with her. Now, she had family that didn't stay with her. Well, they were destroyed with the rest of Jericho. And they would have been lost to history. We'll learn after the defeat of Jericho exactly what happened. But next week, when we get to chapter 3, we're going to look at their preparations that they made. What happens? What miraculous events happen? Because God is working. And the whole book of Joshua is God working in his people to cause his promises to be fulfilled. And this is just the start of that. Joshua's commissioned. He does what a good leader is, finds out what he can about where he's going, and he finds out the Lord is preparing the way. The people are quaking in fear, and he is strong and courageous. Lord God Almighty, we ask that you make us people that are strong and courageous, that we will be courageous in obeying what you tell us to do, that we will understand the times, and even when they look scary around us, because truly we do live in scary times, we can put our trust and faith in you, that no matter what happens, we will be safe in your arms, and that no matter what the world throws against us, how it persecutes us, how it hates us, how it ignores your word, it ignores us and your witness of yourself here in this world, that we will be safe. We will be eternally safe in your arms. But even in the meantime, you will keep us safe here on earth until it's time to go home. And then you will take us home and we will be safe for eternity with you. Lord, we look forward to your return when you will rule in righteousness and truth and justice and peace here on earth. But we also look forward to eternity with you, where we will spend eternity in the new heaven and new earth, where all will be righteousness and truth and peace. Lord, help us to understand what you did in history and how you caused your word to be satisfied, to be fulfilled, and trust you that you will fulfill the words that have not yet happened. In your gracious name, amen. I hope to see you Wednesday at church. And if I don't see you on Wednesday, we'll see you next week here. Have a good week.